Since it was launched in 1958, some believe NASA has encountered evidence of UFOs, and some UFO researchers say they're covering it up.
The notion that we're alone in the universe becomes absurd.
After Roswell, UFO sightings increase at an incredible rate. Are astronauts seeing things too? Official NASA videos capture possible anomalous objects on film.
They are objects that are out there, obviously not stars.
But NASA dismisses the sightings.
Why did they finalize a report on unidentified flying objects without finding out what those were?
Astronauts rarely come forward with their stories, but now details are coming out.
The policy was that we should stay quiet about such things.
Frankly, I don't see why they would fabricate this kind of material. It's almost a negative career-wise for them.
Has NASA discovered proof of UFOs?
I'm not entirely convinced that all the NASA footage is a bunch of dust particles.
And are they hiding what they found?
He said, well, we have to airbrush these out.
This is case number 58306, the NASA Files.
We have an unidentified flying object.
Since the beginning of the manned space programs in the early 1960s, UFO researchers have claimed that NASA missions are seeing UFOs in space. Cameras aboard NASA spacecraft photograph and videotape numerous large solid objects. According to some experts, these objects appear to accelerate, change direction, and even evade danger. NASA's explanations say that these are images of ice crystals or other normal space debris. But others are convinced that NASA is not disclosing the entire truth.
Don't you guys find it strange that NASA is not interested in UFOs at all?
NASA has a limited budget, and UFOs is just considered to be so unlikely that NASA put their resources towards other areas they feel are more likely to yield fruit.
They say they're not interested in UFOs, and yet they've got all this footage of strange things flying around. What exactly do we have to do to prove that there's a UFO cover-up at NASA?
We've got to find people who are credible witnesses inside NASA, and we've got to find the documents that say NASA knows there are UFOs. That's what we have to investigate. Ted wants a smoking gun? Let's go look for a smoking gun.
The team heads to Denver, Colorado to speak with a former NASA employee who has a unique insight into NASA's relationship with UFOs.
Hello, friend. Good to see you again. Come on, guys.
John Schuessler worked in the engineering department at NASA during the Gemini and Apollo programs from 1962 until his retirement in 1998. He was awarded the NASA Public Service Medal in 1997.
If anybody knows about a NASA cover-up from the inside, it's John Schuessler.
Were you inside the NASA machine?
I did have a top secret clearance. I'm interested in solving this mystery. I'm trying to find out why somebody that's really responsible for our space program wouldn't be interested in something else up there. And all I got was stonewalled.
What's the NASA policy on UFOs?
I never saw a written policy, but the unwritten policy was don't go there. Now that's a policy. It's non-subject is a policy, whether you want to say it or not. I found that NASA had a list of organizations outside of NASA. Those organizations were supposed to be able to give me the NASA policy. That's pretty strange. NASA should be speaking for themselves.
While NASA has no official policy on UFOs, other government and military agencies found the perfect way to dismiss any talk about the subject: the Condon Report. The report, commissioned by the Air Force in 1966, was led by physicist Edward Condon. After 2 years of studying UFO information gathered by both government and civilian groups, the report determined that all cases had rational explanations and that no further study of such phenomena was necessary. Quote, "The subject of UFOs has been widely misrepresented to the public by a small number of individuals. If we came across any evidence whatever that seemed to us to indicate a defense hazard, we would call it to the attention of the Air Force at once. We did not find any such evidence. We do not think at this time the federal government ought to set up a major new agency, as some have suggested, for the scientific study of UFOs."
Why did they finalize a report on a study of unidentified flying objects without finding out what those were? His executive summary said, forget it all, there's nothing to it.
So you're saying the Condon report was far from objective. There was Air Force influence on the report to make sure that it came up negative.
And the Air Force used that statement by Condon to shut down Project Blue Book and say for the next 40 years UFOs didn't exist.
With all government agencies, including NASA, no longer officially interested in studying the UFO phenomenon, it became difficult for astronauts or anyone else working for NASA to speak about anomalous events they possibly witnessed.
If you look at the index to this, Chapter 6 of that is visual observations made by U.S. astronauts. The very first case I ever heard of was on Gemini 4. And on Gemini 4, you had an outstanding pair of astronauts up there.
This was James McDivitt and Ed White?
James McDivitt and Ed White. One of them said, hey, there's something up here.
June 1965. Ed White and James McDivitt are passing over Hawaii in the Gemini 4 spacecraft. They suddenly spot a metallic object with long arms protruding from it. McDivitt takes a series of pictures. Some hours later, McDivitt is on duty while his partner sleeps. He sees something strange over the Hawaiian Islands. A round object with a comet-like tail, and manages to take some movie footage. According to the official NASA transcript, McDivitt contacts NASA, quote, Gemini 4. Capcom responds, quote, how are you doing up there? McDivitt reports back, quote, fine. I just saw something else up here with me, but just as I was getting close enough to take a good picture, the sun got in the way and I lost it. The official mission audio reveals that the capsule communicator, or Capcom, acknowledges and shows interest in what McDivitt is seeing. McDivitt says, quote, stand by and let me see if I can find this thing again. Capcom responds back, quote, that's a firm. You still looking at the thing up there? McDivitt reports back, quote, no, I've lost it. It had big arms sticking out of it, it looked like. I only had it just for a minute. I got a couple of pictures with a movie camera and one with the Hasselblad, but I was in free drift before I could get the control back. I drifted and lost it. After the Gemini 4 mission concludes, McDivitt is surprised to find that NASA releases only one picture and one still frame of his footage to the public. He maintains the released picture is not what he saw and denies NASA's explanation that the object is simply a reflection on the window. McDivitt believes he may have accidentally photographed a secret defense satellite.
The astronauts themselves are talking about UFOs.
Well, some of them did.
Well,
not very many. Pilots generally will not speak out about UFOs, even though they encounter them on a regular basis. It's taboo. They just won't do it. Their real business is flying in space. They don't want to talk about anything else.
But this is not the only time a Gemini mission will spot something strange. December 1965. Astronauts James Lovell and Frank Borman in the Gemini 7 capsule see a UFO on their second orbit around the Earth. Gemini Control at Cape Kennedy explains it away as the final stage of their Titan rocket. But once again, official mission audio tells a different story.
797 here, you listen on your 8. Last cleared, 7, go ahead. Approaching at 10 o'clock high. This is Houston, say again, 7? So yeah, approaching at 10 o'clock high.
But Lovell, Borman's co-pilot, notes that he sees the booster rocket on his side of the craft. According to the official NASA audio transcript of the mission, Lovell says, quote, "I have the booster on my side." Capcom responds, quote, "What direction is it from you?" Lovell reports back, quote, "It's ahead of us at 2 o'clock, slowly tumbling." Later audio shows Capcom convincing Borman and Lovell that this is part of the booster rocket after all. But despite this explanation, NASA rarely addresses this or other early astronaut sightings.
I was told one time by a director that you have to make a decision in what you really want to do. Do you really want to follow UFOs, or do you really want to be in the space program? It wasn't accepted or given as a threat. It was given as more like, this is the way it is. This is life here.
Others who have worked within NASA, like John Schuessler, report that there is an unspoken code of silence on the subject. One woman is willing to break this code, and she claims to have witnessed NASA not just ignoring evidence, but suppressing it.
One of the things that I noticed was a spot. He said, well, we have to airbrush these out.
Since the beginning of NASA's manned space flights, the agency has refused to officially comment on the possibility of UFOs encountered during their missions. But there are a few who've been willing to come forward and talk on the record about NASA and UFOs. The team sends Pat to pick up an inside contact who claims that she has witnessed NASA covering up the existence of UFOs firsthand.
Hi.
Donna Hare claims to have worked at NASA as a subcontractor with security clearance. She has recently gone public with her alleged encounter at the Johnson Space Center in Houston.
I became aware that there were craft at NASA and it's being kept secret, and I had seen pictures in the lab.
The team is aware that Donna's story is a controversial one, but she strongly believes in what she claims to have seen. While at NASA, her work focused on graphic design. During her tenure, she believes she saw someone suppress evidence.
Can you describe what you saw in some detail?
I was working in Building 8, and one of the technicians there was making a mosaic. One of the things that I noticed was a spot.
According to Donna, the technician was making a mosaic map of an undisclosed area. A satellite in orbit was taking numerous pictures of the location and sending them back to Earth so that they could later be put together to form a grid of the entire area. In one of these pictures, Donna claims to have noticed a strange object that seemed out of place.
I said, is that a bubble on the emulsion? He said, no, bubbles on the emulsion don't leave round shadows on the ground. He said, well, we have to airbrush these out before we sell them to the public.
She wondered, was this just protocol to airbrush normal objects or distortions, making the photos more clear, or an attempt to erase errant pictures of UFOs?
They did have a protocol in place, so obviously other things have gone through that they've taken out.
I mean, are we talking about a NASA cover-up here?
Donna's story has never been independently verified. And if this was a UFO airbrushed out of existence, does this mean the entire organization is in on the cover-up?
All of NASA is not covering it up.
But I do believe specific people in there are keeping it covered up, which is more scary than a UFO to me.
Did anybody at NASA ever tell you, don't ever talk about UFOs?
There was two gentlemen that did come to my house, and they basically told me it was not a good thing for me to talk about it. Now, they didn't say you're going to die, but I was getting my phone tapped a lot, and I was getting followed.
If it's intimidation, it shouldn't be done. To me, that's completely against the American way of life. We shouldn't be talking about this. I think this is one of the most serious subjects that we're ever going to see.
These allegations of a NASA cover-up are extraordinary, but those who come forward stand by their experiences. The team turns to the history of NASA shuttle encounters in an attempt to find more answers. When the Space Shuttle Columbia launched into space on April 12, 1981, astronauts were spending not hours, but days and later weeks in outer space. It would be logical to expect anomalous sightings to increase as well. That's exactly what happened. As the number of reports from shuttle astronauts increases, NASA continues to search for explanations. Space debris was a common explanation, but NASA soon discovered that the shuttle itself could be having an impact on what astronauts were seeing. The team heads back to California for a first-hand look at an astronaut's point of view. Brick Price has built an exact duplicate of the control room of the space shuttle, which is often used in Hollywood films.
Well, here's the space shuttle. What do you think?
Wow.
The mock-up was constructed from the original shuttle blueprints, so every square inch of it is accurate. Brick has set up a cross-section of the space shuttle's windows and set up a camera to film through them, displaying its point of view on a separate monitor. His experiments will explore a theory of what the astronauts could have seen.
A lot of people who have seen this NASA footage say that these objects flying around are just bits of debris or even chunks of ice that have sort of been chipped off the space shuttle. Is that something that could actually happen?
Sure, and that's a possibility.
The space shuttle's windows are typically 4 to 5 window panes thick. And because of this, the view outside can easily be distorted.
With these panes of glass, we're going to be able to show you reflections. AIM is going to be shining a bright light here and trying to mimic what might happen with sunlight moving around. The glass is very thick. What you have then is you have an inner surface and an outer surface on each piece of glass that has separation, and then you have 4 or 5 pieces of glass. Now each of those surfaces will reflect light.
With light reflecting through several different panes, it can make debris on the windows appear to grow in size or move.
You'll see as the sunlight moves around, it's going to pick up different aspects of this.
On the computer monitor, the team can clearly see how easily light can distort the smallest particle.
As you'll see on here, note that this one fades out, that particular one right there. So it looks like it's growing. It looks like it might be coming towards us because as the light increases in intensity, it appears to be growing bigger. Now, that stuff you're seeing coming across in between the lens and the sheets of glass, the window. And it's being illuminated from the light that's coming on the window side.
Not only is there debris outside the shuttle, but there is also debris between the window panels.
How would debris get inside the panes of glass?
Here you can see how the panes of glass are vibrating at different frequencies. And that translates, of course, to the edges here. So if it pushed against it like that sheet of glass and caused it a little piece to just break free. It could be anything. It could be a paint or a piece of aluminum or maybe some dried up insulation or something.
So aberrations are common. Not only can there be debris magnified on the outside of the window, any internal debris that breaks off in between the glass layers can appear as a strange object as well.
Stark sunlight coming, at acute angles into the field, ice particles, all these add up to me to a pretty good set of candidate explanations for what we're seeing in these photos.
So all this goes to show that when you're looking through these multiple panes of glass, you're looking at a lot more than just what's outside.
Oh, absolutely. It's much more, as I said, there's much more than meets the eye.
There's clearly a lot of objects that are far off in the distance from the space shuttle, and those may not be little pieces of ice or dust particles. I'm not entirely convinced that all the NASA footage is a bunch of dust particles. There may be some stuff out there.
Brick's demonstration may explain some of the objects seen by astronauts, but it doesn't explain official NASA footage taken outside the space shuttle. Footage that shows objects which some claim are moving under intelligent control. August 6th, 2005, just before dawn over the Pacific waters that separate Hawaii and the U.S. mainland. A camera on Space Shuttle mission STS-114 Discovery photographs several unidentified lights in the sky. One of them appears to come to a halt and then reverse direction. The video has been sped up 10 times to more clearly show this change in trajectory. NASA gives no official explanation for what this object might be, but their most common explanation for sightings of this kind are ice crystals breaking off from the shuttle. In this case, that explanation seems highly unlikely. But Dr. Jack Kasher, a professor emeritus of physics at the University of Nebraska, has examined this and other NASA videos, and he believes this is not always an adequate explanation.
There are several key ideas that led me to at least be satisfied with the concept that these are not ice particles.
You see an object come into frame from the lower right. It seems to stop, but it's not stopping, right, Jack?
Nope. It's moving away at this point. It's circling back around.
Every other object in frame is almost as if it's stationary, except for that.
It passed right about through here. That's the Earth. And it's going to come back down lower than it was before.
You really have an object under intelligent control, arcing around and heading back toward the Earth.
Could there be another possible explanation? Is this object a meteor or comet? A comet or meteor moving in the vacuum of space will continue to travel on its existing course unless it's affected by an outside force. For this object to change direction, it needs to hit something. But this object doesn't appear to collide with any other object.
When I first look at this, I thought these were stars and that we're in orbit looking out into space. It looks to me like it's following a perfect arc, moving away from us on an orbital plane, and the plane is above our point of view.
And I'm disagreeing and saying, no, it looks like this is actually changing direction before our eyes.
To be intelligent, to me, it would have to do something that was outside of a natural orbital arc. It's like a nice, natural, continuous arc that would be a function purely of an inanimate object just in standard gravitational orbit.
Whether this object is in a natural orbit or actually changing direction is difficult to determine. Even if this object is in orbit, it is highly unlikely to be a satellite or space junk, neither of which would have this type of orbital path. But the STS-114 shuttle mission isn't the only mission to have recorded an anomalous event in space. The team will look at one of the most provocative pieces of evidence to date.
This was the video that convinced NASA not to release the video right away.
Since 1981, Actual NASA footage taken during space shuttle missions displays what some UFO experts believe are objects behaving in an unnatural manner. September 15th, 1991, Space Shuttle mission STS-48 Discovery, near 8:30 Greenwich Mean Time. This video was captured by a camera mounted on the bulkhead of the shuttle. A glowing object appears near the horizon. It moves toward the left of the screen, but then quickly moves to the right at an incredible speed. A TV camera mounted on the outside of the shuttle records the scene. A light flashes at the left of the screen, and the object changes direction and streaks away. Later, two streaks of light flash through empty space. What did the space shuttle camera capture?
This was the video that convinced NASA not to release the video right away. This became famous.
And what makes this so interesting is that we're out in space, so we don't have too many options. If the main object is an ice particle, it's about up here. The camera is back here, pointing up at a 45-degree angle.
Okay.
We're left with this vernier rocket firing down here as the only possible cause of an ice particle up here accelerating up and around like this.
Vernier rockets are small rocket engines originally used on these missions to help keep the shuttle on its correct trajectory. There were 4 vernier rocket thrusters on the Space Shuttle Discovery during STS-48, 2 that point outwards and 2 that point down. When these were fired to help keep the shuttle on its path, they would often cause ice particles to break off from the shuttle into space.
There are a couple of the objects that you can track. If they are being accelerated by a rocket away, where those trajectories meet, that has to be the location of the rocket. And the trajectories actually diverge when they come back, so they couldn't possibly be accelerated by a vernier rocket.
If a vernier rocket caused ice particles to accelerate, then these objects' paths could be traced back to the rocket. But in the footage, the objects' paths go in opposite directions. Making it nearly impossible for the vernier rocket to be responsible.
Then you'll see there's a half-second pause. An ice particle can't pause when it's being pushed. We have some vernier rockets that actually did fire about that time, but there is a 1.2-second delay between when the rocket fired and when the main object started to accelerate.
In your history of doing projects like this, have you ever been wrong?
From what I can tell from this data that I got, it stopped for half a second.
Since these objects' paths do not coincide with the origin point of the vernier rockets, and they also appear to stop in mid-flight, the team believes that it is very unlikely these are ice particles from the shuttle.
It stops. That means there's some intelligent control going on.
But some UFO researchers theorize there is a darker story behind the flash at the top of the screen and the sudden movements of the objects.
One of the theories about what the objects are that seem to come from Earth in the NASA STS-48 video is that it's some kind of a missile or a projectile. Something comes up from the lower left of the screen towards the object that just moved out of its way. The people who know the weapon systems that were around when STS took place say we didn't have any of those weapons. If there were weapons aimed in space, if those weapons existed, those would be the very weapons aimed at a UFO coming to Earth from outer space.
NASA would help a lot of us to understand this better and maybe eliminate a lot of this UFO speculation if they had some people that would come out and offer us their explanations for some of these things.
But is there an explanation for what the team believes is the most compelling NASA video yet? February 25th, 1996. A 12-mile-long tether accidentally breaks and floats away from the shuttle Columbia. When the tether is between 75 and 100 miles away, the shuttle camera records dozens of small orbs suddenly surrounding it. The standard explanation is space debris. But why would debris cluster around an object? And why does it seem to keep circling the tether?
See those little snowflake or those disc shapes going right behind the tether?
This UFO must have been at least 100 miles across, flying behind this tether.
NASA maintains its only mission is to explore outer space. But some claim NASA is suppressing evidence of UFOs. The team has been analyzing official NASA video taken during space shuttle missions to investigate these stories. STS-48 captures an object that changes direction in an instant. And STS-114 films an object traveling a very unusual path. But in the case of STS-75, the team finds the footage so compelling that they seek insight from Experiment's producer, John Tyndall.
Today we're going to demonstrate a difficulty that 3 dimensions being captured by 2-dimensional cameras.
John believes this experiment will shed light on the images captured by STS-75. A tether broke off from the space shuttle and was seemingly surrounded by small orbs. He has set up a spatial representation of the tether and the windows of the shuttle.
All right, now you can see that's the tether. It's broken loose. See those little snowflake or those disc shapes going right behind the tether. Now, other ones are appearing to be in the foreground, which leads a lot of folks to believe that they were real and they were out there.
These particles may be nothing more than ice and debris from around the ship that are out of focus because a telephoto lens was used.
NASA maintains that this is nothing more than ice and debris that's around the ship that's out of focus because this is a telephoto lens. Now the camera was using a lens, a telephoto lens, which incorporated a mirror. This hole that's in the center of this mirror also leaves an artifact, the same artifact that you see in the discs.
Light illuminates these objects from behind, and then this light bounces off the mirrored lens. The objects will now appear to have the form of the lens, even though this is not their actual shape. This can be seen by Tyndall's example. He has prepared a small piece of fishing line that is backlit by a green light. However, when the line is passed in front of the camera, it doesn't look like fishing line. It takes the form of a circle with a hole in the center.
Sunlight was coming across and hitting ice crystals and backlighting them and causing them to illuminate. Any shape that's around the lens of a camera or around the optical path will impinge on those circles of confusion.
But even if the object's shape can be explained, why do they appear to pass behind the tether and circle it? John has set up a mock tether inside a three-dimensional environment and will show how this optical illusion occurs.
You see how overexposed the tether is at this point? Mm-hmm. Even though this is in the foreground, it gives the illusion that it's passing behind.
The image on STS-75's camera is overexposed, meaning that objects appear brighter than they actually are. This gives the illusion that they are behind the tether, when they are actually in front.
So you've mimicked a UFO?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think John Tyndall did a good job demonstrating a number of potential optical aberration effects that you might see in the conditions of taking photographic or videographic imagery through the space shuttle windows.
The team successfully recreated some images from the STS footage, but others still remain unexplained. The only source, besides NASA, left to offer any further information are the astronauts themselves. Despite what some refer to as a code of silence amongst NASA employees, especially pilots and astronauts, some have decided to come forward with their own stories.
I'm Edgar Mitchell. I'm one of 12 men who walked on the moon.
Edgar Mitchell is the sixth man to walk on the moon, and a believer that extraterrestrial intelligence is likely.
So, Dr. Mitchell, you are not the first astronaut to speak out about UFOs and extraterrestrials. Can you tell me about some of the others?
Through talking with astronauts and individuals in both government and intelligence agencies over the years, I'm quite confident we have been visited. The notion that we're alone in the universe becomes absurd.
Because you have to be so highly skilled to be an astronaut, do you think that these reports of UFOs should be taken very seriously?
Virtually all of the sightings by pilots and test pilots should be considered credible.
Mitchell suggests that government agencies like NASA are not telling the entire truth.
The literature in the UFO field, even though covered up and denied by officialdom, it's full of sightings.
How does a disinformation program work?
The standard tactic has been releasing a little bit of valid information with a great deal of false information to cast dispersions and to cast doubt on the real information. Most people in government don't know anything more about this than the man on the street. It's only a certain individual that really has all the details.
What is NASA's goal in their continuing silence regarding UFOs? Are they ignoring a subject they have no interest in? Or holding back the real information? The team digs deeper into astronaut testimony.
I'm Dr. Brian O'Leary, former NASA astronaut. Not only is the phenomenon very real, but there's also a very elaborate cover-up.
The team has uncovered evidence on both sides of their NASA investigation. Evidence that may explain reported astronaut sightings and NASA videos. But some astronauts remain adamant that the UFO phenomenon is a reality, and that NASA has known about their sightings from the very beginnings of manned space missions. NASA pilot Joseph Walker told the National Conference on the Peaceful Uses of Space Search that he had filmed 5 cylindrical objects during his historic flight in April 1962, when his X-15 climbed 50 miles above the Earth's surface. Then he told the stunned audience that the previous month he had filmed 2 disc-shaped objects. Only one still image was ever released by NASA. Walker's statement was a rare discussion by a NASA pilot regarding sightings of UFOs, and not the only one. Gordon Cooper, one of the astronauts from NASA's original Mercury project, claimed to have witnessed several strange aircraft throughout his career.
They're just typical saucer shape, double lenticular shape, metallic. So I knew that we didn't have any vehicles of that kind, and I was 99.9% sure that the Russians didn't have any of that type either.
And according to his memoirs, he said that NASA and the government, quote, swept these and other sightings under the rug.
Gordon Cooper was very bitter that the secret had been kept from the American public, and he went so far as to address the United Nations about this topic.
There's no way within the military or within the government of keeping track of something that is classified unless you're directly involved in it, and I was not.
Frankly, I don't see why they would be wanting to fabricate this kind of material. It's almost a negative career-wise for them to be coming forward with this sort of evidence.
In 2008, yet another former NASA astronaut has come forward.
I'm Dr. Brian O'Leary, former NASA astronaut. Not only is the phenomenon very real, but there's also a very elaborate cover-up.
Brian O'Leary, a NASA astronaut from 1967 to 1968, originally slated for a manned mission to Mars, has also come forward. But he wasn't always a believer.
I myself was once a skeptic. Totally rejected the UFO phenomenon. I thought they were hallucinations, marsh gas, Venus. I was on Carl Sagan's bandwagon during the 1960s and while I was an astronaut. After I left NASA, I really began to learn of what it's like to be the target of scoffing by people who would normally be my friends, my colleagues, just because I would inquire into areas that were outside of their box of inquiry.
But were these attitudes passed on to all astronauts, or just to those who were interested in UFOs?
Some of my fellow astronauts and scientist astronauts who did go up and who have observed things, very clearly they were told not to report it.
It is these reports which leave UFO researchers and other experts without a solid answer to their biggest question. Why does NASA continually avoid the subject of UFOs?
We've got documents here, the Condon reports, the testimony of Ed White and James McTivitt, the UFOs they saw. I think I've moved beyond believing that there are mere contradictions in NASA's UFO policies to believing that there may, in fact, be some kind of UFO cover-up.
Cover-up at NASA? I doubt it. I'm not sure there is that much on record to cover up at NASA, besides some of these sort of very spurious videos and a few testimonies.
What about the testimony of the astronauts themselves? I mean, can you ignore that?
You can't ignore it, no.
Has NASA already gained knowledge of extraterrestrial intelligence? The team believes that until all NASA photographs and video evidence are released and open discussions on the events are allowed, the NASA files will remain open.